And so, we come to the end of our series on the Sermon on the Mount, and as we are beginning to open up our church to welcome people back in, I thought I would come in and record the last one of these sermons from here. So the Sermon on the Mount, this is Jesus' massive block of teaching at the start of his ministry on earth, as recorded in Matthew's Gospel. And I hope you've enjoyed the chance that we've had over the last few weeks to look into this, to dig a bit deeper and find out what Jesus had to say. I hope also you realise that we've only been able to scratch the surface. I hope you've taken the opportunity to go away and look in a bit more detail at some of the questions and some of the things that I've been able to introduce you to during these short talks. Now, this sermon we've seen contains instructions on how we should live our lives, but this isn't just a list of ethical rules. It's not just a list of do's and don'ts. The whole sermon only makes sense if you take seriously the identity of the person preaching. So what do we learn about the preacher from this last passage that we've looked at today in Matthew chapter 7? Well, he's the one that can call God Father, there in verse 21. He's the one who has the authority to say whether we will stand or fall on the day of judgment. That's there in verse 22. People who don't accept Jesus' rule over this kingdom, they will be rejected. That's there in verse 23. And Jesus says in this sermon that we must give our undivided allegiance to him. He claims the place that up until this point was reserved only for God. And the crowds who heard this for the first time, they were amazed. Look at verse 28 and 29. They were amazed because he taught as one who had authority. Jesus doesn't let the people listening or reading duck the challenge that he sets. He forces us to decide where we stand. Which road are you on? Are you going to go through the narrow gate or the wide gate? Are you on the way to destruction, or are you on the path to enter God's kingdom and live that eternal life with our Father? Will you build your life on Jesus and Jesus alone, or will you say that other philosophies and other religions, well, they'll get us to the same place eventually? Are you going to accept this final version of the offer that God gives here? Will you sign up to this contract that we've been talking about over the last few weeks? Or will you walk away? There is no middle ground. There is no happy medium. There is no silent majority. There is no space between the very good and the very bad that we can take for ourselves. There's no room for saying, well, I might not be Mother Teresa, but at least I'm not Stalin, so I must be doing okay. It doesn't work like that. You are either in the kingdom or you aren't. But remember what we said at the start. This sermon, it's not a checklist of things that you have to do to enter the kingdom. There is nothing that we can do to earn our way in. It's why that contract picture that we've looked at a few times, it really falls down. It's not the whole picture, because this is a completely unequal contract. There is nothing that we can bring to this agreement. But this sermon is the way that we are expected to behave when we are part of that kingdom. Like I said at the start, the standards of the Sermon on the Mount, they're not readily attainable, but nor are they unattainable if we are changed by God, working through his Spirit in our lives. You see, there has to be change. You see the evidence of growth on a tree from the fruit that it produces. You see the evidence of change in our lives from the fruit that we produce in the way that we live. But beware, says Jesus. Some will try to fool you. Some will be like thorn bushes, pretending that they have beautiful grapes on the outside, and they'll look like they're part of the kingdom. Remember, this sermon is for those who are aspiring to be part of this kingdom. And the bad tree, the foolish builders, these are the people who think that they are already part of it, who think they're saved, people who the rest of us might look on and think, well, they're in the kingdom. And they'll only find out too late that they aren't in the kingdom. They never were part of God's plan. So beware those that carry the tag of Christian but don't show the fruit. Those who say all the right words but have no compassion for the needy. Those who are generous with their money but keep other parts of their lives very much out of God's reach, who keep the inner parts of their minds shut off and don't let the Spirit change them. Those who teach, those who do little videos for the website, those who train others, those who run services, those who run meetings, but who judge others, not out of love, not because they're showing that rightful discipline that we've seen, but because maybe they don't want to face the fact that they have the same weaknesses in their lives. So how do we build on the rock? How do we choose the narrow gate? Well, it's very simple, although it's not easy. We hear and we obey. We don't hear and talk. We don't hear and delay. We don't hear and find reasons why this particular bit of what Jesus says might not necessarily apply in our particular situation. We hear and obey. It says, love your enemies, so we should love our enemies. It says, pray, so we should pray. It says, do not worry, so we shouldn't worry. And to sum it all up, it says in verse 12, do to others what you would have them do to you. And so we must go out and do that. Well, that's it from me for this series. I hope you have enjoyed my brief guide. As ever, all the good ideas that I've come up with are not from me. They're from lots of other people, but in particular these two books, Sermon on the Mount, Life Within the New Covenant by Christine Leonard. That's posed some really interesting questions which we've looked at over the last few weeks. It's given me the overall structure of what we've done. And Michael Green's book, The Sermon on the Mount, that's given me huge amounts of amazing material to share with you through these little videos. But what about you? What have you learned from this series? Thank you to all of those of you that have commented, that have emailed me, come back with ideas, disagreed with me. Good. I wanted to get a conversation going. Please do keep commenting. Please do keep writing to me. Please do keep thinking and praying and reading yourselves. But my challenge for you as I leave you now is to go away and read the whole sermon again. Think about that very first question that I asked right back at the start. What would it look like if God really was in charge? What would it look like if God was king of the world and boss of our lives? And when you've done that, and when you've read it, and when you've thought about it again, then I point you to what James said in his letter. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says.